We are told that the ancient Maya were a sophisticated civilization of astronomers, mathematicians, and architects. You know, the guys who invented the concept of zero built massive pyramids without wheels and created calendars so accurate that everyone in 2012 thought the world was going to end. And for the most part, that's true. They were geniuses. But what your high school history teacher conveniently forgot to mention is that when the rain stopped falling and the crops died, these geniuses didn't rely on math to fix the problem. They relied on dragging teenagers into a pitch-black hole in the ground and smashing their skulls open. This brings us to the Actun Tunichil Muknal cave in Belize, or the ATM cave, which is a terrible acronym because the only thing you're withdrawing from this place is nightmares. In the late 1980s, explorers pushed deep into this submerged system, battling knee-deep water and claustrophobia until they stumbled upon something that shouldn't exist. It wasn't gold, and it wasn't a hidden library. But wait, it gets even creepier. Lying on the floor of the deepest chamber was a teenage girl. But she wasn't just a skeleton. Over 1,000 years, the cave's minerals had calcified her bones, turning her into a literal, sparkling crystal skeleton. They call her the Crystal Maiden. She looks like a Halloween decoration designed by Swarovski. But the explorers quickly realized that she wasn't buried there. She was left there. And the evidence surrounding her suggested that she wasn't alone when she died, and the people who put her there were trying to hide something massive. To understand why the Crystal Maiden is so terrifying, you have to understand where she is. This isn't a roadside attraction with a gift shop and a bored teenager named Kevin selling tickets. The ATM cave is deep in the Tapir Mountain Nature Reserve. To get there, you have to hike for 45 minutes through the jungle, swim across freezing rivers where things definitely touch your leg, and then squeeze through rock formations tighter than a pair of skinny jeans on Thanksgiving. It is a logistical nightmare. When archaeologists finally cracked this place open in 1989, they expected the usual stuff. Maybe some broken pottery, some jade beads, perhaps a graffiti tag from a bored ancient teenager. They found a massive central chamber, often called the cathedral. It was stunning, massive, and silent. At first glance, it looked like a museum storage room that had been hit by an earthquake. Yes, but here's the part where the vibe shifted immediately. The floor was littered with ceramics, hundreds of pots, vases, and jars. But they weren't just broken, they were murdered. Every single pot had a kill hole punched right through the bottom. The Maya believed that objects had spirits, and to release them to the gods, you had to kill the object. This wasn't a trash heap, it was a sacrifice. And as the explorers pointed their flashlights further into the dark corners, they realized the kill holes weren't just for the pottery. The floor started crunching under their boots, and it wasn't ceramic shards. It was finger bones. The team eventually cataloged 14 skeletons in the main chamber. And if you're picturing brave warriors who died fighting for glory, stop. You are way off. Most of these remains belonged to children. Some were infants less than a year old. This wasn't a burial ground. It was a transaction. The Maya were facing a drought so severe it was collapsing their entire society. So, the priests went into full-blown crisis management mode. Imagine a CEO realizing the company is bankrupt and deciding the only way to save the stock price is to burn down the headquarters. That was the logic here. They dragged these kids a mile underground, into the dark, screaming, "Please send rain." And then, thwack! Most of the skulls showed signs of blunt force trauma. It wasn't quick and it wasn't pretty. It was brutal, messy, and frantic. But here's the part that makes your stomach turn. These weren't just random peasants they grabbed off the street. Eye analysis of the skulls showed signs of cranial modification, that weird elongated head shape that was trendy among the Maya elite. These were the children of nobles. The kings and queens were so terrified of the drought that they were sacrificing their own kids to the rain god Chak. It was absolute hysteria. But even after all that blood and chaos in the main chamber, the explorers noticed a small, difficult passage leading even higher up into the cave system. A place where someone had crawled alone to make the ultimate offer. To reach the final discovery, you have to leave the cathedral and scale a sheer vertical rock face. There are no stairs, no handrails, and absolutely no safety nets. It is basically an OSHA inspector's aneurysm waiting to happen. The explorers had to free climb wet, slippery limestone in the pitch black. And remember, the Maya priests didn't have heavy-duty flashlights or carabiners. They were doing this barefoot, holding sputtering torches, likely high on hallucinogenic mushrooms to commune with the gods. But here is the part where the logistics get horrifying. They didn't make this climb alone. They were dragging a live, terrified 18-year-old girl up there with them. This wasn't a burial, it was a special delivery. The fact that they took her away from the other children and isolated her in this high, impossible-to-reach ledge suggests she was the nuclear option. The previous sacrifices hadn't worked. The rain still hadn't come. So they needed a premium offering, delivered as close to the ceiling of the underworld as possible. When the explorers finally pulled themselves over the ledge, they found her. And unlike the others, her death froze in time in the most spectacular way possible. There she was. The Crystal Maiden. She was lying on her back, her mouth open in a silent scream, her limbs splayed out in a way that suggested she was dropped violently. But the most striking thing wasn't the pose. It was the texture. Over 1,000 years, the cave had been dripping mineral-rich water onto her body. The calcium carbonate bonded with her bones, layer by layer, until every single inch of her skeleton was covered in sparkling crystals. When the explorers' headlamps hit her, she literally glittered. It's hauntingly beautiful, like something out of a dark fairy tale. But the science behind it tells a much darker story about timing. But wait, here comes the reality check. The level of calcification implies she has been untouched for a millennium. Now, the sediment buildup confirms that after they killed her, nobody came back. This was it. The Hail Mary pass. The priests smashed 2 vertebrae in her spine, enough to paralyze her, and left her to die in the dark as the water slowly rose. Then they turned around, climbed down the cliff, exited the cave, and probably waited for the rain. And judging by the fact that the Maya civilization collapsed shortly after this, we can safely assume the rain god left them on red. For a few decades, the ATM cave was the Indiana Jones experience you could actually buy a ticket for. It wasn't behind glass, it was right there at your feet. You could literally breathe on the artifacts, though please don't. But whenever you mix priceless, fragile history with sweaty tourists in cargo shorts, disaster isn't just possible, it is inevitable. Now, the Belizean government trusted the public to be respectful. They trusted us to walk carefully around the remains of a tragic, ancient genocide. And this is where we proved why we can't have nice things. In May 2012, a tourist was hovering over one of the skulls in the main chamber, trying to get that perfect, award-winning shot. Maybe his hands were slippery from the swim, or maybe he was just clumsy. But gravity did its thing. His heavy DSLR camera slipped from his hands and crunch. It landed directly on the skull, punching a hole right through the ancient bone. He managed to do in 2 seconds what 1,000 years of erosion hadn't. The Belizean authorities immediately went nuclear. They banned all cameras, phones, and recording devices from the cave forever. So if you go today, you can't take a selfie. You just have to suffer in the moment, like our ancestors intended. So we have the bodies, the pots, and the glittering teenager. But recent acoustic studies suggest there was another layer to this nightmare that you can't see. You can only hear it, or rather feel it. Some archaeologists believe the placement of the cathedral chamber wasn't random. It wasn't just the biggest room. It was chosen for its specific acoustic properties. When you are that deep underground, the silence is heavy. It presses on your eardrums. But if you start chanting, the echoes don't just bounce, they amplify. Researchers have found that certain stalactite formations in the cave, when struck, ring like massive stone bells. They are called lithophones. The priests weren't just killing kids in the dark, they were putting on a terrifying concert. Yeah, but here's the part that sounds like straight-up sci-fi. The acoustics in the Crystal Maiden's chamber are designed to induce a trance state. The combination of flickering torchlight, oxygen deprivation from the fire consuming the air, and the rhythmic drumming on the stone bells would have created a sensory overload, a literal, altered state of consciousness. The Maya didn't see this as a cave. They saw it as a functional portal, a machine. By manipulating sound and light, they believed they were physically opening the door to Xibalba, the underworld. The Crystal Maiden wasn't just a sacrifice, she was the battery they plugged into the machine to try and force the door open. So, what is the takeaway here? The Crystal Maiden is not just a spooky skeleton, she is a glittering monument to the absolute limit of human desperation. The Maya built one of the greatest civilizations in history. They mapped the stars, they understood time, and they built cities that make modern architecture look like Legos. But the moment the water ran out, all that logic evaporated. They didn't build better aqueducts or invent desalination. They grabbed a teenager and smashed her spine in a dark hole. It is a brutal reminder that fear makes us stupid. When the pressure is on, we don't rise to the occasion. We sink to the level of our superstition. The rain god never answered. The drought continued, the cities emptied, and the jungle swallowed the temples. The only thing that survived the collapse perfectly intact was the victim. Today, you can hike up there without your camera and look her in the eye. She is still screaming, sparkling in the flashlight beam, waiting for the rain that arrived 1,000 years too late. It turns out nature doesn't negotiate with terrorists, even if those terrorists are priests with a really fancy stone knife. The Maya are gone, but the Crystal Maiden? She's forever. And honestly, considering what her family did to her, she deserves the spotlight.